Good afternoon. As I read to you an essay that I wrote about a month ago entitled Ukraine and a Law-Based Civilization. I will explain. This spring heralds the long-awaited Ukrainian push for victory. The future of this war is hanging in the balance, we are told. Although since that time they've nuanced whether the whole war hangs in this particular push. I may well be wrong, but in my gut I fear the war will not end well for Ukraine. Apparently Russians are also being prepared for the war not going well. Such is the fog of war. However, this war may go for Russia. I fear the outcome much worse for Ukraine. It always is in terms of the price paid in treasury and blood. And whatever the justifications for war on the part of Russia, to understand the invasion is illegal and subject to the court. That Putin has called to the court the right thing, and so sad we did not have to go to court before the war to avoid the barbary in the first place. Why is it that when diplomacy fails in the matter of war, war is the next step? Why not off the courts, I wonder? So I looked to expert opinion. Below are some excerpts of their essays with my commentary, and they only add my fears about how this war is going to go. They note, never forget the real reason Russia went to war. They note, what alarmed Russia so profoundly that it reacted militarily was the explicit effort to pry Ukraine out of Moscow's orbit and bring it into NATO, end quote. And the evidence for that is overwhelming. A red line clearly set, and Russia warned, Putin warned, and his right to first strike in this age of terrorism, so he pulled the trigger. To say he was not provoked is a great lie and a great propaganda feat on the part of Western media. They note for 3 generations, American ambassadors to Moscow delivered a clear and consistent warning against expanding NATO into Russia's territorial sphere of influence. Remember how we felt about Russian missiles in Cuba, and still do. They note George Kennan, architect of NATO, in 1998, alarmed by NATO's expansion, wrote New York Times columnist Tom Friedman, I think the Russians will gradually react quite adversely. I think a tragic mistake not to advance eastward. He also said in another place, a diplomatic tragedy not to end NATO. In a letter to the State Department, he wrote, nowhere does forcing this choice appear more portentous and pregnant with fateful consequences than in the case of Ukraine. Ambassador J. William Burns, the most distinguished foreign officer of his generation, now serves as the director of the CIA, quote, strategic policy considerations also underlie a strong opposition to NATO membership for Ukraine and Georgia. Regarding Ukraine, he notes, the issue could lead to violence, even some claim civil war, which would force Russia to decide whether to intervene or not. We knew what we were doing, to force Russia to intervene or not. If Canada had gone to devolved into civil war up there, and there were a lot of killing on the border, we would have done what Russia did. But in the chess match of great powers, did Russia blink? Sucker punched into going to war with Ukraine so America could destroy them. And right up into the outbreak of the current war on February 24, 22, the Western media consistently rejected calls for neutral Ukraine. Not only rejected, it was like just dismiss them right out of hand, like they don't even have a right to feel that way. Without empathy for the enemy, you don't see him or her clearly. To explain Putin's motives, they note, is not to justify his actions. They were illegal, criminal. Yet, without a clear-eyed understanding of why Russia invaded Ukraine, we're not off the court yet. Hopefully someday that will be the natural course of things. We have little hope of negotiating an end to this conflict, they note. And so what is going on in the media? NATO Secretary of Ukraine recently in Ukraine shaking Zelensky's hand, poking Russia in the eye. Taunt your enemy. As Ukraine gears up to go on the offense. Now, they also note by Minsk agreements, and these agreements, one of them was actually overseen by France and Germany. These were agreements that the governments of Ukraine and Russia had agreed to. It's the question of enforcing them. And France and Germany backed up one of them. And why the rest of the world did not is a good question. Everyone on board but Ukrainian nationals, and so now we have civil war. And the question is, why did we put ourselves in the middle of that? We took a side to fund a war. In midway, more and more war escalating. Once again, mission creep. Today, I hear Biden has approved F-16s, and Ukraine caught in the grinding gears of great history. They also note Ukraine's famed unity is a myth, noting modern Ukraine has extremely complex, shifting borders, much of which was Austrian from 1772 until 1918, then Polish until 1939, occupied by Germany during most of the Second World War, and then part of the Soviet Union only from 1945 till 1991. The Russian-speaking eastern and southern regions were annexed to Ukraine by the Bolshevik leader Vladimir Lenin in 1922, himself, I understand, a Ukrainian. And in 1954, Soviet leader Khrushchev added the ethnically Russian Crimea to Ukraine by administrative fiat. Now, why he did that, I don't know, but what we're learning about is an extremely complex part of the world sorting things out. And why did we put ourselves on the side of war in that? Why did we take a side in that? Why not have been peace brokers? Noting, again they go on, politically Ukraine is divided between pro-Russia and pro-European factions, with those seeking closer ties to Russia found mostly among Orthodox Christians living in the east or Crimea. This division is not new. 15 years ago, the American ambassador to Moscow, George Burns, I noted above, would lead to just this situation. Got to be given a medal if he has not already. Now that group of ethnic Russians and Russian-speaking Ukrainians, now viewed as enemies. Their political parties, media outlets, and churches have been closed. Whether this is a genuine matter of national security or simply an effort to eliminate opposition to the current Ukrainian nationalist government is a matter of opinion. But these divisions existed long before Russian invasion, which has now made them worse. End quote. And soon Ukraine facing elections. They note the West propaganda machine has overplayed its hand in Ukraine. Zelensky often compared to Winston Churchill, they note, and in at least one respect this comparison is surely accurate. Like Churchill, Zelensky has waged a relentless public relations campaign designed to convince the potential allies that his cause is just, his nation can win, and his opponent has violated the norms of civilized behavior. But is any of that correct, they ask? 20 years ago this month, we were led into war with Iraq by many of the very same individuals and institutions for sure, that are today promoting more direct confrontation with Russia, which was their game all along, I understand. Today, these same voices proclaim that this time it's different. And in one sense, they too are certainly correct. Unlike Iraq, Russia has a nuclear arsenal at least as large as our own, unquote. And that is why I fear the war will not end well for Ukraine. To keep in mind, the Ukraine war came about by a failure of diplomacy. A failure of diplomacy. You see, in our war-based civilization, war is the only option when negotiations fail. To imagine an alternative civilization in which when negotiations fail, things breaks down, like all the rest of it, no matter what the issue, big or small, off to court you go. As we all have to, as I note, if peace is to prevail. Imagine today a Ukraine thriving at peace. Is it not time to vote, planet Earth humanity, for a law-based civilization? I pray. God bless.